Welcome to tonight's gathering. I'd like to begin in prayer. This being from the heart and the pen of Jan Richardson, a Lenten prayer entitled Ashes. Let us pray. Now, more than ever, let us be the ones who will not turn away. Let us be the ones who will go farther into the wreck and deeper into the rubble. Let us be the ones who will enter into the places of devastation beyond belief and despair beyond our imagining. And there, let us listen for the spirit that brooded over the formless darkness. And there, let us look again for the God who gathered up the chaos and began to create. Let us be the ones who will give ourselves to the work of making again and to the endless beginning of creation. Amen.
Amen.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's presenter, Bob Hunter. Bob Hunter was a diversity and justice specialist for the Indiana Division of InterVarsity and also on the national leadership team for Black Campus Ministries of InterVarsity. He has taught courses on racism and conflict management at Trinity College, Binghamton University, and Earlham College, and is the former chair of the Richmond, Indiana Human Rights Commission. He's the co-author of Loving Justice, published by InterVarsity Press, and co-editor of Yearning to Breathe, Liberation Theologies in the United States, published by Orbis. I'm also especially happy to say that Bob currently serves on the board of directors for Just Faith Ministries. Bob, thank you very much and welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. I also want to give a shout out to my children who are not children. They are adults. My son is an activist in the Philadelphia area. He has now moved to New Jersey, right across the river, the Delaware River, and is involved with climate change. He's worked with the Sunrise Movement, and he works with Bill McGibbon. Has a couple of books out on climate change and activism. He was, at one point, he was the director of the Training for Change, which grew out of George Lakey's movement and Quakers. So he's sort of hanging out with the Quakers that he met really because of being here in Richmond, which is where Earlham College is, and a good Quaker contingent lies here in Richmond. So, and my daughter is teaching Spanish also at a Quaker institution, a local school. She is a playwright and an actor and a songwriter and does singing. And so she very much engaged in writing songs for justice and that sort of thing. So I'm very proud of my kids, and I'll add that to my resume, Jack. So next time it gets read, they'll be in there. It's good to be with you. As I said, I've not done a webinar during this pandemic. I've done a number of Zoom situations, and but it's good to sort of try this out and see how it goes. My topic tonight is Black progress and racial backlash, but it's really built around the book by Carol Anderson, a book called White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide. White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide. Carol Anderson is an academic. She's a historian, professor of African American Studies at Emory University. And the book actually for her began in 2014 when she was writing an article for the Washington Post. She was writing this article about Ferguson and the whole Michael Brown incident and what was going on in Ferguson. And her initial idea of framing that article was to talk about the rage of the Black community dealing with racism. And, you know, as we looked on our televisions and looked in the newspapers, we saw a lot of images of a community that was just torn apart by what had happened to Michael Brown, by the fact that they left him in the street for half a day or more, his body just lying there, people having to go around him. It enraged that community. And so she was going to write about that. And as she got to thinking about it, she said, you know, in a real sense, though, the real rage here is what happens to Black communities when they succeed. And she got to thinking about history in that, with that framing. It was a sort of a reframing. So she reframed her article, and the article was titled White Rage, and then later wrote the book, which was a larger historical work, framing that, in fact, the way you look at, one way to look at Black history is not how Black people have fought back in anger from the racism, but the white rage that constantly comes up when Black people succeed. And that framing that white rage is, there is a kind of rage that comes out when the Black community succeeds. And of course, she wrote that article with that in mind, and then look historically. And as I was preparing for this, Hank Aaron died. And I began to look at Hank Aaron, and I said, well, you know, the political dynamic around rage might be harder to show than Hank Aaron's story, which has no political element to it. I mean, it's not about politics. It's about sports. It's about the success of a man who was engaging in sports. Hank Aaron, for those of you who may not be baseball buffs or sports buffs, broke Babe Ruth's record, 715 home runs in a season. And that record was going on. He was getting close to it in 1973. 1973, he was getting very close to it. And by 1974, he broke the record. When 1973, he was experiencing tons and tons of hate mail and death threats. And at the end of the season of 1973, he said to several of his colleagues and the people around him, I don't know that I'll make it to season 74. There were so many people enraged, and he got hate mail, and it was racist hate mail, full of the N-word and all kinds of insults and insults to Black people. So it's easy to believe historically that maybe people are concerned about something political and they get over concerned and racism rises up and it's that. But in Hank Aaron's case, it's very clear, I think, that what we're talking about is people that did not want a white man's record broken by a Black man. Very, very clear in that situation. The story is really pretty scary. His daughter ended up, she was in college at the time, and she ended up being visited by FBI agents who said, we've got your building surrounded, look out the window. Those gardeners out there, they're FBI agents, they're here to protect you. The janitors, the new janitors in the building, those are people from the FBI that are here to protect you. We're trying to keep you alive because your dad is about to break the record. It's just really sobering to realize that what we're talking about now here is not anything that was going to affect any of these people that were threatening them. I mean, there was nothing at stake for them, nothing political, nothing in terms of economic, nothing in terms of anything except Black progress, where a Black man was going to replace a white man's record in sports. An area that should have been fun. So I always wondered, you know, I was, at some point I'll write Carol and say, you know, you really have to include this in your book. Next time, you know, the revision of your book, this has got to be included because it shows better than any other incident what's going on here. And so that's what really convinced me when I started thinking about Hank Aaron, that yes, this is a topic that we really have to explore, Black progress and white rage, the white rage that comes out of it. Of course, we know a number of incidents where there is Black progress. One of the most talked about recently has been Black Wall Street. That's the Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa, Oklahoma was an area in which the Black community was able to buy a section called Greenwood. And it was the Greenwood section of Oklahoma that was purchased and became a haven against the segregation of Oklahoma. Oklahoma became one of the highest segregated states, and Tulsa was no exception. And what Oklahoma was able to do, the Black community in Greenwood was able to do, was to build up a really pretty encapsulated, insulated community where they had everything there, including banks and stores and barbershops and movie theaters. I think there were 3 movie theaters. There was a number of things there that were able to help them in that area. And so a dollar, they said, would be passed 9 times before it left the community. You know, that's a good indication of an insular community where it was able to take care of itself, and there was a number of wealthy business people, and the people were thriving. But there was a great deal of anger in the segregated community, in the white community around them, because the Black community was doing better in general than the white community was. Again, another situation where there's rage because of Black progress, and the comparison was overwhelming. Of course, there were occasions when Black people would go into the white community. They didn't do it much because they had to sit in the back of whatever, or in the back of a theater if they had gone there. There was no reason to do that since there were 3 theaters in their own community. But occasionally to do a restaurant, maybe a different kind of cuisine or something. But one day in somewhere around 1921, a young man entered into the hotel. There was an elevator, and as he was stepping into a hotel, he actually tripped on the edge of the elevator. It was a little bit higher, and he tripped, and he grabbed to catch himself, and there was a white female elevator operator, and he grabbed her, bumped into her, and she screamed and yelled rape, and he was arrested and put in jail. And the rumors were flying that night that he was going to be lynched. So the Black community got together, they got guns, and they went to the site to defend him. And in the ensuing mess, the white community showed up with guns as well. And basically they killed as many people as they could in the Black community, wiped out the stores, burned down the theaters, burned down the town. That was known as the Tulsa race riots at the time, and it was seen as a race riot. But in Carol Anderson's framing, we wouldn't want to call it a race riot. That was white rage, the white jealousy that exists with Black progress. Carol, in her book, actually talks about a number of cases, some of them personal. She talks about, in that same era of Black Wall Street, a number of people who moved into white neighborhoods. So that was a thing. Anybody that's seen some of the movies about that era knows that there were neighborhood watch groups and neighborhood associations that kept Black people out of the neighborhood. She talks about a Dr. Ocean Sweet, who decided that he was a medical doctor in Detroit area, the area called Black Bottom, where most of the Black people lived, but he decided that he would move into a nicer home in a white area. And again, another attempt to progress, to live with a nicer home, and he bought one of the nicest homes in a white area, which of course was deadly. And in the end, he he ended up getting charged with causing a riot. But he didn't cause a riot. He moved in, and that evening his home was pounded with rocks and bottles and some gunfire outside. It happened night after night, and finally he gathered some veterans with guns to defend the family. And when the riot started impinging upon his home, there were gunshots fired, and he was charged with causing a riot and went on trial. One more example, just a tragedy. These are hard stories, but what I'm trying to create in us is to realize that as a Black man, and I realized this as I read her book, I realized that as a Black man, I've had two difficulties. One is to succeed, and the other is the fear of success. There's a fear of success that happens in the community that when they do succeed, they're met with this kind of challenge. How do you succeed? How do you have the motivation to succeed over and over again when people in your community are killed, destroyed, burned down, murdered with success? That is the kind of question that I think we're up against. And what she's trying to say in that many of these things, as we look at history, are not framed in that way. They're framed in the struggle to succeed. There's a celebration in some books, hopefully most books, when the community succeeds. But what happens? What has happened? She spends some time in the Reconstruction and the end of Reconstruction, and that's where a lot of these things come from. There's at least one incident that I think is really pertinent to us in understanding how Reconstruction actually ended. Of course, Reconstruction is talked about in the history books with the passing of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the freeing of the slaves, the franchisement of people born in the country in the 14th Amendment, and the right for at least Black men to vote in the 15th Amendment. But in the election in 1877, there were challenges to Hayes versus Tilden. Hayes was running against Tilden. Hayes was a Republican. And of course, in those days, Republicans were the people who were the radicals, the leftists. The left wing of the United States was in the Republican Party in those days, and Tilden was on the right. And there were 3 states that were contested. 3 of those states were contested. And Congress met, and of course, the Constitution allows for the Congress to do some allows them to make some kinds of arrangements to solve the issues when there's a contested, when a state brings 2 groups to the Electoral College. And so they're allowed to do that. And so in the Hayes versus Tilden, that was the situation. The Congress was up against something, and the Congress formed a little group that was going to solve the problem. It was kind of a backroom deal, and what they decided was that they would vote for the electorates for Hayes, for the Republican, if Hayes removed the troops from the South that were protecting Black people. That was the deal, called the 1877 Compromise. Wasn't really a compromise. It wasn't even really a above-the-board deal. It was kind of backroom deal made with a contested election, and that's what happened. And of course, that removed the protection for Blacks and ended Reconstruction. Now, that's pertinent. I tell that particular story because that's pertinent to our current situation. That was the precedent that Ted Cruz was using to form a group that would disenfranchise Biden. He said that since there was a group that was formed at that time the U.S. had a precedent for Congress to form a little group that would make a distinction about Congress. Of course, the situation was totally different because they had state governments that were in that were where the vote was contested. In the Biden-Trump election, there was no contested elections in any states. They had run all of the processes they needed to do, the recounts and so forth, and so there was nothing contested. So it's totally ridiculous to consider, but yeah, that's where we are today. And I want to say some things about that, but let me look at just one more incident. Wilmington, back in the 1800s, 1897, just at the turn of the century, Wilmington, North Carolina voted in just before the ending and this deal that was made just before that, or just after that, they had a biracial government in Wilmington, North Carolina, not Delaware, Wilmington, North Carolina. They called it a fusion government because it was biracial. And a lot of us don't have the sense that there was real progress, that there was a civil rights movement during that time. There were civil rights laws passed. And we had in some places like Wilmington, North Carolina, biracial governments, what they called this fusion government. But that was unsatisfactory to the white populace. And so there began circulating a petition called White Supremacy that was to say that we do not accept a biracial government. We do not accept a biracial situation. And so, and like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was an incident. It was an editorial given in the Black-run, Black-owned newspaper in Wilmington that challenged this white supremacy doctrine, this white supremacy pamphlet that was being circulated. And it caused a group of men to go out and to basically kill. It was a coup d'etat. So if we think the coup d'etat that just happened, or the attempted coup d'etat that just was attempted in January 6th was the first, what we see in this case was another attempted coup d'etat, and it was successful. They basically killed the leaders of the city, the mayor and the council people, and established a white government. Again, another progress overturned. Carol Anderson is saying to us here, what we're dealing with is the rage that shows up when we see Black progress. And if we don't understand that framing, if we don't look at that framing, we might not have some of the solutions, some of the ways of looking at this thing that would lead to solutions that we need. Of course, she ends her book by going into where we are now. I am convinced that she is right. The racism we are seeing in our country today is the backlash to the progress of getting a Black president and now a Black female vice president, person of color. We are seeing a tremendous amount of backlash to progress once again. And that's what we're actually seeing. And it's also interesting to look at I mentioned the coups that have happened in history. The attempt on January 6th was very similar to the coups that we've always had, sometimes more locally, and this time it was national, but we were dealing with that. Some right-wing evangelical pastors in Texas and some other places are preaching sermons now. They're called the Rise of Jezebel. For those of you who don't know, Jezebel was a biblical character. She was not wanton sexually, but that's kind of the way that she's portrayed in today's circles. She was not wanton in terms of disobedience to her husband, though she did believe in a different God than Israel, and so she was a challenge to Israel in the biblical text. But who they mean by Jezebel is Kamala Harris. They're not mad at Biden. They're worried that he's going to die because he's old. They're mad at Kamala. If that's true, if I'm right about that, we're in for a heck of a time. Because we have black progress. And when we have black progress, we have white rage. And there is a section of the country that is out of fear and their own rage at Kamala Harris. Biden, yeah, maybe, but focused on Kamala. So what do we do? I mean, here we are. I mean, I think if I'm right, we have people that are enraged, very, very enraged. And yeah, Rush is dead, but his anger has been spilled out to so many other people. Rush Limbaugh, I'm referring to. What do we do? I've written down a few things, and then we can talk about it. I think it would be good for us to ask questions and have some dialogue as we talk about this. But people need to see successful black leadership. That would be my first. People need to see successful black leadership, and they need to see that in our institutions. Whatever institution, by our, I mean you and me. Whatever institutions we are in, do we have black leadership? If people don't see black leadership, so we're not just talking anymore about black membership. Some of us are struggling with that, or white membership if you're, but diversity, we're struggling with diversity, but we need to see black leadership. Now, I'm a member of a black church, so we have plenty of black leadership where I am, but we've got to see it in fusion organizations like North Carolina, Wilmington. If we're not seeing black leadership, then people do not have models. People do not have experiences. We've got to white people have to have experiences. This was one of the things I really emphasized when I was sort of a chaplain, college chaplain, worked with the university group at Cornell University. One of the things I told my students, I said, well, how are we going to get diversity in the chapter here? Because I inherited a predominantly white group. It was actually white and Asian, some Asian participation, no black or other people of color. And I said, maybe some of you will be called to go join the black church in town, because you'll get experience sitting under black leadership. And yeah, it's an AME Zion church. You don't know, you're not Methodist, go anyhow, it'll do you good. In fact, I think everybody should join the opposite of what they grew up in for a little while. So if you grew up in high church, go to a low church. If you grew up in a low church, the Baptist or the Pentecostals, then join the Catholic Church or Episcopal. Go somewhere different for a little while, just because you're learning here at college. So that's part of your, so that's what I suggested to them. But I suggested in particular that they join a black group if that's what they were interested. So this guy, Andy Crouch, not Andre Crouch, the singer, although Andy Crouch is also a musician, I sent him down to join the St. James AMEZ Church in Ithaca, New York. He came back the next Sunday and said, they found out I was a musician, so they asked me to play. So I'm going to play next Sunday. I said, oh, that's great. And then he comes back the next Sunday and he says, he's in tears. He said, I'm messed up. I don't know how to play like they sing, I just really messed it up. I said, well, I'm sorry, you messed up, but let's learn a little bit about sitting there and how you can learn. And so he started learning. He started learning how to play piano in a black church. He's an expert on cross-cultural music right now because he learned. I saw him many years after that at a conference. He was at the piano. I was sitting next to another person who was kind of a musician and a good guy and black man. And Andy got up and he said, well, let's play this song. And the guy next to me said, oh no, here we go. So I said, I played him along. I said, what's the matter? He said, well, he's not going to be able to play this song. I said, well, let's see. Let's wait a minute. He played the song and the guy leaned back to me and he said, he knows what he's doing, doesn't he? He can play that song. And he also understands what it was about because he talked about it. There's a guy who sat under black leadership and had something to offer. So I think that's got to be a goal. So my next goal is, what black leadership do you sit under? What black leadership have you had? And where can you find some? Some folks that are in charge. So that's my second thing. There's some black people here, so it doesn't work quite the same way because most black people have sat under white leadership. It's been almost impossible for us to be in the United States and not do that. So this is not an equal thing. It doesn't work quite that way just because the situations are different, not because I don't aspire to equal challenges to all people, but because the dynamics are a little bit different. My third point is that we need to know history. We need to know our history. Where is the phrase found? He has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers some merciless Indian savages. That is a line in the Declaration of Independence. Our Declaration of Independence, probably being one of our better documents in the United States, has in it a phrase referring to the merciless Indian savages. We got to understand our history. We are a country built on white supremacy. And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand its roots, now I'm talking to a group that understands that. You're here because of this, so I'm not talking down to you, but I'm saying we have to spread that. We have to help other people understand that. We have to get people into that and to understand what's going on. And then one last thing I think we need is that we all need some work on our emotional healing, our traumas. In a book group that I'm in that Debbie Weatherspoon is also in, though she can't make some of the meetings now, is a book called My Grandmother's Hands. And in that book, he talks about the traumas existing in both the white community, the black community, and communities of policing, and the kind of traumas. And his suggestion is that we can't, it's not just an intellectual thing. We can learn about the history, we can learn about some of the other things, but in the course of what's going on internally, there's some stuff that is so deep and so emotional that we need some exercises, some ways of approach that get below the words and the constructs that we have in our heads, and to get to gut level feelings that we sometimes experience. So I think that we need places where we can do emotional healing. We need people who have expertise in emotional healing, and we need to visit that. So that's where I'm going here. I'm saying that I think we are in for a hard ride. 2020 is not over, and it won't be over for a long time. In addition to the traumas of a virus, we have a new step in the progress of Black progress, and that's exciting. You know, we need to celebrate that. But we also need to recognize that with Black progress comes terrible backlash. And that's the point of my talk, that we prepare for that by helping people see progress at micro levels and at local levels, that we understand our history, that we help people understand the history, that we deal with our own selves and those around us and helping them prepare for Black progress and to understand it and to celebrate it. And that we do some work and that we find ways to find emotional healing for ourselves and those around us. One of the things I know that Just Faith is talking about is a program that would take activists and help us to deal with the divide in our country. How does an activist prepare for the divides? How do we talk to our families? How do we talk to people around us? How do we talk to our church communities that may or may not understand our commitments to issues of justice? And I think that is Just Ministry seems to be one of those ministries that can really sort of on the cutting edge, that can sort of figure out the next step. And I think that's one of the next steps we have. So thank you very much.
Bob, thank you. That was extraordinary. The questions are just starting to pop in. So let me just take a look for just a moment, see what we have. And while I'm looking at the questions, Bob, let me ask. I'm not even sure this is fair. I probably should put this out to the whites in our audience. So let me throw it to you, and then you can throw it back to me.
Okay, sure.
So everybody in the United States has experienced Black leadership because of President Obama. I realize it's a distant relationship. It's not something close by. It's not somebody you can see in person, probably. And there was this this kind of, I think you're right, this kind of rage that came out of that. I guess the question I want to ask somebody is, whence comes the rage? Why rage? Why not dissatisfaction, but why rage of all things? Yeah. And that's what I want to ask. And again, maybe it's a question we got to throw to the white members of our group tonight.
Yeah. Let me say some things and then throw it out to others. I think rage is partly fear. I mean, we rage when we're terribly afraid and we think our whole world is coming down. The rage that we're seeing so much in the culture right now is coming from evangelical Christians as well as others, but led on by evangelical Christians. And I think it's because evangelical Christians are fearful of the world crumbling. I mean, they think that all of you leftist people are not real Christians, none of you, or real religious people in any way, and that you are not, you're in cahoots with some weirdos, and QAnon suggests that. I mean, QAnon is sort of the edge of the ultimate fear, that not only are you not Christians, you're pedophiles out there just doing people in. And so there's this irrational fears that come out of Black progress. And if people have that at the local level, but Obama was made to be so scary. And somehow the media allowed that in some ways, I think. I blame the media and others, because Obama was, remember when Sarah Palin went after him? She would call him a local activist or a community organizer and use those terms. Well, he was those things, but he was also a constitutional law scholar and taught at one of the, Chicago Law School, one of the best law schools in town. He was head of the Harvard Law Review, the first Black person that did that. He knew the Constitution better than, and then we look at Donald Trump, and what does he know? It's just a remarkable thing that what we have in our country is not a clear-eyed, and so people didn't really meet Obama. You know, I mean, there was one woman on the radio from Indianapolis who said, you know, I look at the Obamas and I just can't, I don't know what it is, but I just can't see them as our president and first lady. And I'm going, you don't know what it is? You know, I mean, this, you know, it's just ridiculous. It's very hard. So yeah, fear. It's the depth. I mean, we're talking the ultimate fear that everything is going to come to an end.
Well, Bob, one of our participants tonight wrote that the rage is really because white people don't want to relinquish historic power and control. That they've been on top, and the appearance of losing that on topness is results in the irrationality of rage. Yeah. Leela,
and that was said. That's why I went through the Wilmington thing, because that was actually in their white supremacy thing, that we will try to be fair to black people as long as they don't get on top. You know, that was actually part of that white supremacy doctrine. So, excellent point.
Bob, somebody else writes, Walgreens just named an African-American woman as CEO with a $25 million bonus. The Merck CEO was an African-American man. And the question really is, is there something to be done to publicize these success stories just so that people are aware of that fact and that those success stories are happening before us?
Yeah. There's got to be, and I think people try to do that. There have been some scientists that have been on the forefront of the vaccine research, and Dr. Fauci was mentioning them partly out of concern that black people wouldn't take the vaccine and that might help them trust it better, but also some people really dealing with trying to say, you know, this thing is black progress. My concern with Merck and Walgreens is that those are happening in the middle of a pandemic. So when we get black leadership in the middle of something that's already fearful, I'm not always sure how that's going to translate. So that's my fear about those situations, or my concern, that in the middle of a pandemic, when you suddenly have the change of guards, or in the middle of a crisis, when you have the change of guards. And that's basically was the Obama as well. I mean, he took over in the middle of a crisis. It was caused before he got in. But I don't know how many Facebook conversations I've had with people who said he caused the crisis. Because what they saw was, they heard there was a crisis, but they saw Obama and then they experienced the crisis, and the experience was after Obama got in. So I have a number of charts that I charted out and show where the crisis happened and all that kind of stuff. And people just, you know, some people, data means something to them. And there's a lot of people that their gut level is speaking and data doesn't mean much to them. So yeah, I think that those are good things, but we also need them at the local level, you know. We need them in our communities, and we need people that they can talk with. And get to know, and folks, and that's happening. But you know, so that's one of the things. They got to do some emotional work too, though, or that's not going to work.
Bob, I'm also awfully glad that you brought up the whole matter of black leadership. It just seems to me one of the most clear, simple, well, not easy, simple, but clear and unambiguous choices that white people can make is to deliberately seek out participating in some kind of group, advocacy group, for example, that is led by black leadership, and to be supportive of, to join and be a part of that community, supportive of black leadership, and simply experience what happens to you as a consequence.
Yeah. And it may be, you know, when the students asked me about that, I said, well, you know, don't go down there to take over or to lead. You know, don't make a missions trip down there. Go down there to sit under black leadership. And they said, well, will they accept me? And I said, well, the black church is probably the most accepting place you can be. But no, black people aren't always going to, because they're mad too. They're mad.
Yeah.
So there's some folks that are mad at you. Go there anyhow. See how, I got to go places people don't want me there. You go see. Of course, they were welcomed very well in the church communities. It was actually where the struggles were with their own peers. Older black folks had been through it, but younger folks who are mad or maybe at a different point.
One of our participants tonight writes too, Bob, that, and I quoting here, I also believe that white people fear people of color will do to white people all the terrible things that have been done to people of color.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very perceptive and has said a lot.
Yeah. There was a dramatization several years ago about Nelson Mandela interacting with some of the Afrikaner leadership, and during which the leadership at the time said to him, "How can we be sure you won't do to us what we did to you?" And he said, "Because we don't want to be like you."
Yeah.
Tradition here, since everybody's muted, is to say thank you with a silent clap. So if everybody would join me just thanking Bob for your time and your words, it was just very, very helpful. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you again for being with us. To re-emphasize, Leela will be sending an email to all of you with the video link to Bob's presentation. So feel free to share it widely. Send it to your friends and your family. Also, in that email will be an invitation for you to collaborate with us. Tonight's presentation was free, and we love providing these at no charge so that everybody can join in. But I'd also like to ask those of you who have enough, and maybe more than enough, to share in our work. Specifically, I invite you to take a look at the link that will be in the email to see how you can partner in the work of Just Faith Ministries. Our work is to provide resources that can change people who then can change the world. I'll close with a short prayer. Tomorrow, if I wake up, I will not waste a minute on things that don't matter. I will hug, I will pray, I will sing, I will march, but I will not whine. I will not disparage, I will not detract, I will not hide my eyes. Tomorrow, if I wake up, I will love the Lord with all my heart and my neighbors with all my heart. Amen. Thanks again, everybody, and good night.